Let's make a globe with a hex grid. First and foremost, you're gonna need Blender, so just go to your Steam client, search for Blender, don't worry, it's free, and just download and add it to your library. If you don't have a Steam client, it is also free, just go to steampower.com and download it. If you already have it downloaded like me, just open it up and follow these simple steps. So first and foremost, you're gonna need to open an empty file. Brief overview of controls. You rotate around the screen with the middle mouse button, holding it down. If you hold down Shift and hold down the middle mouse button, you can drag along whatever axis your camera is oriented to. Viewport, I should say. Control will let you zoom. You could also just use your scroll wheel to do it more incrementally. Alright, so first and foremost, we're gonna need to enable an add-on. So, open your edit up here, go to Preferences, and search Geodesic Domes. I already have it enabled. Lucky for you, it comes pre-packaged with Blender, so just enable it and you're good to go. This will be our main tool for this tutorial. Once you have it enabled, just close the window. If you don't want to mess around with the entire creation process or configure it to your own needs and just want to have a globe ready to draw on, there's going to be a link down in the description where you can download it from my website. If that's the case, just skip ahead to the time that is written on the screen now. Now, if you want to create it on your own, we're going to first and foremost need to save the project. So find a place on your computer where you would like to save it to. And name it something like globe.blend. Blend is the file type for Blender. So you don't want to change what the file type says. Now once you have it saved, it is very easy to just save quickly on the fly. You just hit Ctrl S whenever you feel like it. Now to get started with the project, we're first and foremost going to need to just want to be rid of everything that is already here. To delete it, just hold down left click to select an area, and it will select everything that is within this rectangle. And once you have done that, you can either hit delete on the keyboard or X to open the menu and then click the button. If you ever make a mistake, you can just hit Ctrl Z to bring it back up on the screen to undo your last action. And if you ever want to redo something after undoing it, you have to hit Ctrl Shift Z. I will redo our last operation, which was deleting. Now, before we can continue any further, we need to configure our scene properties. So first and foremost, if you look over here to the right, we have the scene properties. If you're on a different tab here, just click on the one with the cone, the bubble, and the dot. And open the menu that says Units. So I would like to work, that is mass. Configure length to kilometers. If you don't want to work with kilometers, you can put anything in there. If you wanted to create a tiny world, you can use millimeters. But since I am a filthy European and I want to work on a large planetary scale, I'm going to use kilometers. And to make it easier to work with, I'm going to configure the scale of the scene to be 250,000. That is merely the conversion rate between the internal Blender units and the units that we're working with. If we don't do that, we're gonna encounter some problems with rendering everything on the screen. Since we're working at such a large scale, it will help if we change the focal length to a more manageable number. So if you look in the upper left here, you're gonna see that there's this unit that says focal length. If you change that to 150, I have found that it helps a lot more with working on this project. Now the next thing you're gonna need to do is decide what scale you would like the grid to be at, and how large you would like the planet to be, the world you're creating. So you're gonna need to decide how long each hex is from side to side in the world, not necessarily on the globe. And you're gonna need to decide the radius of your world. Now, of course, in real life, planet Earth is very slightly squished on the poles, but you're free to mess with that as you feel like, but for this tutorial we're gonna just assume that the world is perfectly spherical. For this tutorial I have decided to make each hex 45 kilometers across from point to point, from point to opposite point to be exact, and I want the radius of the world to be around 1250 kilometers. Now that is way smaller than planet Earth, but going much bigger than that will just lead to Blender struggling. Of course, you're free to just mess around with the unit scale of the scene, or just saying that we're working with 45 kilometers of each hex at the moment, but when we're playing it's gonna be like 100 kilometers. You're free to do whatever you want with that. Now the first thing we're gonna need to do is to create a hex to compare with. So to do that, hit Shift A to open the Add menu, and under Mesh, go to Circle. And you're gonna see that a menu down here appears. Open that up, and on vertices, we're gonna decide how many points this circle has. So by default it's 32. I would like it to be 6, so that it becomes a hexagon. And for the radius of the circle, we're gonna need to pick half of how wide across we want the hexes to be. So I said 45 kilometers earlier, so 45 divided by 2 becomes 22.5 kilometers. And because Blender is pedantic, you're gonna need to use periods instead of commas as the decimal point. Now just to help us slightly later, we're going to rotate this hex. So just enter the magic numbers of 90 degrees on the rotation coordinates X and Z. And then, because it's gonna help us later, we're gonna move this little hex that is currently only tiny down here. We're gonna move it along the x-axis so that we can see it when we later create the sphere. So to do that, simply move it across by how much you want the radius of the world to be, which, as I said earlier, was going to be 1250. Now, because I don't want to accidentally envelop the hex with the world, I'm just going to add 5 extra kilometers on there so that it hovers slightly above the surface. And once we hit enter, it's gonna have moved over here. Now, of course, currently it's only a black outline of a hex, which makes it a bit hard to see, especially once we start creating the grid later. So to fix that, make sure you have selected the hex so that it lights up orange. Hit the tab button to enter the edit mode. We're gonna see more of that later, but for now, to make the hex solid, just hit the F button on your keyboard and it will make a solid hexagon. And then hit tab again to return to object mode, where we were before. Now we have a solid hexagon, also known as the bestagon. Now that we have our scale hex in place, we're going to want to add our globe. So to do that, hit Shift A again to open the Add menu, Mesh, and then down at the very bottom you're going to see Geodesic Dome, which was enabled by the add-on that we added earlier. So you click that, and you will see this Modify Geodesic Objects menu pop up. Now there's a lot we're going to need to configure here for what we want to do. First and foremost, we want to set class to class 2. We want to set the tetrahedron to icosahedron. And we're going to want to set the shape to hex. This is how we get our hex grid. Now it's worth mentioning that hexagons can't perfectly tile on a sphere without the occasional pentagon. So you're going to see a few of those in there. It's not a big matter, just be aware. Not every shape is going to be a hexagon on this sphere. Now, next up is our radius. Now, unfortunately, this radius completely ignores the scene units we configured earlier. So you're going to want to adjust this to fit your own needs slowly. Now, with any of these sliders, I recommend adjusting them ever so slightly and see what they do, because if you increase any of these numbers too quickly, Blender will need to make a lot of calculations for how this shape is supposed to look, and it can take a long time if you increase it too much. So what I have found for the scale I want to make this on is that putting in the number 5 for radius suits our needs very well. You will see that it almost touches the test hexagon we made earlier. Now, of course, once you click anything except the sphere, it's going to close the menu for configuring it further, so be aware of that. However, if you simply hit delete to delete the sphere again, and you hit Shift A and create a new geodesic dome, it will open with the same settings you had earlier. Now, let's say you are not using the same scale as me. In that case, merely look at the sphere and look at your test hexagon, which you hopefully put at the rough radius of the planet that you want to use, and then slowly increase this number. If you hold down Shift, it will increase more slowly. And you want to increase it until your hex is almost swallowed up by the shape. So as you see there, as I move it ever so slightly, it goes under that ridge of that hexagon. Now, as I said earlier, I want to use 5, so I'm going to leave it at 5. Now, you may have noticed that these hexagons are way bigger than this hexagon. And if each of these hexagons, and the occasional pentagon, were 45 kilometers across, this would be a tiny world. To fix that, you want to look at the number frequency. Now this one you have to be especially careful with, because every time you change this number, Blender is going to recalculate how to create the shape that you're asking of it. And if you ask a lot of it, it's going to need to spend a lot of time to work out how to fit all the shapes into a sphere. And one number can make a lot of difference. So if we increase subdivide base triangles by 1, you will see there's a lot more hexagons. We basically want to hit this little arrow once at a time, until we see that the hexagons on the screen match the size of our little sample hexagon. So this won't be completely exact, but there's no way to do fractions with the frequency. So you're just going to need to hit it until it looks about right. Now you're going to occasionally need to move your screen so that you can see more closely. Just remember the basic instructions I gave you earlier. As we're making 11 frequency, Blender is taking longer and longer to process all of this. But once we've hit 13, we're gonna have a hex grid that approximately matches the sample hexagon we made, though it won't be perfectly aligned. Just trust me that I have made sure it's about the right size earlier. If you want to make sure, you can click on this sample hexagon and you can hit the G button to move it, and Shift X to move it along every axis except the X-axis. And if you move it to align with one of the other hexes, you will see that it matches the size, roughly at the very least. Now, if you need to adjust the globe further, you can't open the config menu anymore. You will just have to delete it and then create a new one, but fortunately it remembers the settings you had entered earlier. It just takes a little time to open it again. Now at this point we don't really need this menu anymore, so once we click on anything else it's gonna disappear, and we don't really need this sample hexagon anymore. So if you just select it, you can either delete it to get rid of it permanently, or you can hit the H key to just temporarily make it invisible. If you look up in the menu up here, you will see that it was automatically named circle, and you can hit the eye icon to enable it and disable it. Alternatively, you can hit the combination of keys that is Alt H to unhide everything. Personally, I just leave it be as a reference for later. Now it's a good time to hit the save key again, and we're going to want to open an additional viewport. So it's very simple, just move your mouse to the upper right corner of this 3D window, and you will see that your mouse cursor becomes a plus. If you just click and drag, you will open a duplicate of the window you had before. Of course it will scale with which one is bigger. Drag it so that it's about halfway across the screen. And we want to change what we can see in this window so that we can more clearly see what we're working with. Right now we want to see the UV editor. So to do that, click this button here, which looks like a grid with a circle. Click it and select UV editor. And you're going to get this square. It is called the UV editor because instead of an X coordinate we have a U coordinate, and instead of a Y coordinate we have a V coordinate. So you're going to want to create a new image, and this will be the map you're going to draw on later. So you can name it anything you want, but I want to name it globe map. And then you can set it to any size you want to, but ideally it should be a square and it should have enough pixels for you to easily work with. And because I prefer to start with ocean and then draw everything else in, I'm gonna make the color blue. And then I'm gonna hit OK. Since we made it so much bigger than you typically make textures, especially small textures, we're gonna need to scroll out a bit so that we can see the entire thing. Now, one thing you have to make sure to know is that even if we hit Ctrl S to save the Blender project, it will not save any changes to the images. And even now, it hasn't saved the image anywhere. If you were to close and open the project, this blue square would be completely gone, because it was never saved. To do that, you need to click on Image, Save As, and then save the image somewhere you can find it later. So by default it will open the folder where you save the project, and I'm just gonna save globe_map.png here, save as image. Now comes the part where we're going to project the globe onto this square so that it knows where to render its texture when we draw it. To do that, we're gonna need to click on the sphere, hit Tab to enter edit mode, and you're gonna see that it will have selected every corner of every hexagon. And what we're simply going to do because Blender knows how to do all of this for you, is that we're going to open the UV menu on the top, and we're going to click Sphere Projection. And it will essentially cut a seam in the sphere and flatten it, which is why we now have this orange mess on our right hand side. Now, if you're familiar with how maps of Earth are flattened out, you will notice that near the poles it will be stretched out more horizontally, while near the equator the hexagons are way smaller, because there's simply less geometry to go around. Now, don't worry that some parts of it are going off to the right hand side. It will essentially loop back around to the other side and fill in the empty space here. Now, remember when I said earlier you could hit Ctrl S to save at any point? Right now I need you to make one save and not save again until I tell you to, because we're going to exploit that little quirk about how it saves the project and how it saves the images. So save right now, and don't save again until I tell you to. So, first and foremost, make sure to enter Face Edit mode up here. Set the transform orientations to local, and set the transform pivot point to individual origins, because we're about to do a tricky little maneuver. Now right click on the sphere and click Extrude Individual Faces and move it ever so slightly. If you look closely, you will see that all of the faces of the hexagon have now moved ever so slightly into the sphere, or slightly outwards. It doesn't really matter at this point. All that really matters is that you now take your mouse to select and invert. And then you hit the delete key and delete faces. Now select one of the hexes and click A to select all of the hexagons, and then click into the UV editor viewport, select everything, select faces, and again set the pivot point to be individual origins. And then ideally you should scroll and zoom into the smallest hexes. And then you're going to hit the S key to scale them. And what this will do is that it will shrink every single hex and pentagon around their individual center points. And essentially you want to make sure that each hex has a couple of pixels of space around them. And once you have this, and once you have the scale you want to, you left click to exit the scale mode. Now we're going to create a new image. So over here where it says globe map, or whatever you decided to name your map, click new image to create a new image. I'm going to name this, no, not map, globe grid. And I want it to be 8192 by 8192. It is important that it is the same scale as the other map you created. Now for some reason it hasn't kept the color from when I created the previous image, but what I want you to do is to make it black. So whatever color is there already, just drag the right hand sidebar all the way down to the bottom so that every value here, on the HSV except the A is 0. And you hit OK to create a new image. Now, of course, this is a new image, so we're gonna need to save it. So click Image, Save As, and I'm just gonna save it as globegrid.png in the same folder as the previous one. Save as image. And now we're going to do a bit of wizardry to create the hex. So if you, on the right hand side here, see this Material Properties tab, you're going to click that, and where this button says New, we're going to add a new material by clicking it. Now it doesn't really matter what you call it at this point, and the base color, if you look here, is going to be white. If you click this yellow little dot here, you open this menu, and you click Image Texture, so that you replace the color with an image. Now you can either open and select an image. For our purposes, we want to use an image we already have, so if you just click the left hand one and select the globe grid, it will now use this image here for rendering onto the sphere. Of course, currently it seems pretty white to me. But if we take our mouse up here to object mode and go to texture paint mode, you will see that it is now black. This texture paint mode is essentially what we're going to use to draw the map later. But for now, we want to use the fill tool, which has this bucket icon. And if you open the tool menu here, make sure that you have it selected to white, and then just click on your sphere. And if you will notice that the sphere we had earlier has now turned white, but if you look on the right hand side, you will see that you now have a grid. And you want to zoom in just to make sure that there is a solid line between each hexagon, and as you can see here, I didn't shrink everything enough. So I'm gonna hit Ctrl Z so that everything becomes black again. I'm gonna hit Tab to go back into edit mode, and I'm gonna select one of the hexagons in the UV editor and hit A to select everything, and then S again to shrink them, so that we have a larger gap between each hexagon. I believe that should be enough. And then take your mouse back over here and hit Tab again to enter paint mode, and left click with the bucket tool to make everything white again. And this time, hopefully, everything should be more solid. What on earth is going on here? Alright, well, I'm not sure why that happened to begin with, but what I found to fix it was to go down to Options and reduce bleed by 1 pixel. And then using the bucket tool again, and that seems to have fixed it. So if you encounter the same problem, mess a tiny bit around with the options down here and see if that helps. And now you will see that we have a grid of hexagons here. Now, if you're too zoomed out, some of the lines may disappear, but just zoom in and make sure, yes, they are indeed there. Now, at this point, we want to save the image, but not the project, because we want the version of the sphere we had before we made this grid. So simply go to File and click Revert, and it will give you a pop-up menu to make sure that you really want to delete all your progress and revert, but it's fine because all the important progress we've made is with the hex down here. So File, Revert, OK, Revert. And now we're back to the version that is purely grey. Now from this point onwards you can use the Ctrl S keyboard shortcut as many times as you want to. Feel free to use it liberally. Now at this point we want to create a new material for the sphere. Now, since we made the previous one after the last save, we are gonna need to make a new one. So go back to Material Properties, click New, and this time feel free to name it something, such as Globe Texture. And as you saw before, in fact, if you click this Viewport Shading button here, you're gonna see the texture of the material we're currently making. So, if you again click the yellow button here by the base color, and click Image Texture, it's gonna turn black, but that's okay. We just click on this image icon here, and select Globe Map. And now we have the beautiful blue sea that we made earlier for the map. At this point, we're going to do some trickery with shading so that we can draw on the map itself, but also see the grid without the grid interfering with our drawing. So if you look up here at the editor type, we're going to click that and open the shader editor. Now, it's very simple. This is essentially the menu we have here. And this is the settings for the image we're using. And we're gonna add another node into this system. So just click Shift A to add, click Search, and type Mix RGB. And you click that. And I'm not holding down any button right now, it's just sticking to my mouse. Left click it between the globe map and the principled BSDF. And it will put it between the color of the globe map and the base color of the principled BSDF. Now at this point, click the globe map, Ctrl C to copy it, and then Ctrl V to paste it. And it's going to paste it in the exact same place, so just left click it and move it away. And we now have two of these nodes, but this one isn't connected to anything. And now we want this one to be the grid. Of course, the grid hasn't been opened in this project. We deleted that version. So click the folder button here, and it will open the folder structure of your computer. Just select the image of the grid. So globegrid.png, open image. And now the image is open here, but currently that hasn't changed anything. So you want to hold left click on this yellow dot here, so that you have this line, and you're going to drag it to color 2 on the Mix RGB shader node. And now it is combining the two. But to do it properly, we want to click here where it says Mix and change it to Multiply. And now if you look at it, you're going to see that we have this blue texture with a grid on it. Of course, to make it a bit more clear, we're going to change this FAC number. So just left click it, and you can also drag it to adjust it. You can leave it on whatever you think is appropriate. I want it to be slightly see-through, so I'm going to put it at 0.917. And as you see on the map here, we now have a nice hex grid pattern on this sphere with the occasional pentagon, as you can see here. So save that, and if you go back here to the editor type, you can open the image editor. And here, click on the view mode and change it to paint mode. And if you click on this little arrow over here, you can open the tool. And if you click on the little arrow here, you can see what tool you have selected. So you could use the bucket tool and make everything white, or you could use the draw tool to just create a shape. Now, it is worth mentioning that because we have a lot of pixels going on here, and a lot of geometry on the globe, it's sometimes going to require a lot of calculations from Blender, so there may be a lot of lag between each stroke. And furthermore, if we click over here in the image editor, we remove the S with Ctrl Z. If for some reason the texture disappears from here when you hit Ctrl Z, but not from here, which is where you want it removed from, just click Image and reload, and it will open the image file that you have on your computer. Now, if we draw a big star on this globe, you're gonna see that it looks a bit strange on the planet, on the globe. You will see that the lower points will like curve weirdly and point towards the South Pole, and the upper points will sort of curve around the North Pole. And well, that's why we don't really want to draw on the image editor. We want to draw on the globe. So hit Ctrl Z to remove the star, and if it stays anyway, click reload because we haven't saved the image. And we're gonna configure this viewport here to allow us to draw on it. So go to where it says object mode and change it back to texture paint mode, our good friend. And we're gonna need to configure our tool. So here, where it says tool, click it, and where it says material, change it to single image, and then click and change it to globe map. This way, when we draw on it, it will only change the globe map image file and leave the grid alone. So if we just click here as a little test, you're gonna see something appear here on the image editor, but it's not where I clicked. And if we look around to the other side of the planet, it appeared down here. Why is that? Well, I don't know why it has done this. Click Ctrl Z to remove the dot, we don't want that. But for some reason, it has created this sphere so that the outside is on the inside. Why? Good question, I don't know. But just hit Tab to go back to edit mode, click A to select the entire sphere, and then go up here to Mesh, click it, go down to Normals, and click Recalculate Outside. And essentially what that does is that it goes through a process and checks, hey, is everything pointing outward? No? Well, flip that side. So now, if we hit Tab and go back to Texture Paint, and click again, the dot will appear where we click. Now, if we carefully look around, you will notice that we occasionally have these spots here, where the hex grids sort of break down. And what this is, if I zoom a bit out and click it, this, if you look over on the image editor, is the North Pole. So essentially, this is a point where this entire line is a single point and Blender doesn't quite know how to deal with the texturing. Now, I suggest that to ease the burden on yourself, you should probably move this pole so that it is actually on the North Pole of the sphere. So I'm simply going to look above, and then I'm going to hit the R key to rotate the sphere, and I'm going to hit the Y key so that it only rotates along the Y axis. And I'm going to rotate it until that weird smudge is on this line. And then I'm going to hit R an X, so that it only rotates along the X-axis, and rotate it until I see it on the X-axis. And if we now hit Tab, it's roughly on the North Pole. And likewise, on the underside, you can see this smudge, that is the South Pole. Now I recommend that when you draw the map, you don't put much on the North and South Pole or on the edge of the map, because it's just going to be annoying when you work with it. And just before I save the version that I'm going to share with all of you down in the description, go over here for the tools for the paint tool and set fall off to hard. That way, when you draw on the map, it's not going to smooth over with the pixels. I find that more helpful when I work with the maps in other programs. Alright, for some reason I seem to remember that there is a way to make it so that the brush size doesn't change as you zoom in and out, but it seems that I misremembered, and you're stuck with whatever size the brush is compared to the viewport and not to the size of your brush. So keep that in mind. So to open the ready to draw files, click on the link in the description of the video, which will lead you to my website, where you can click this link here, ready to draw globe with hex grid zipped, and just click it, save it, go to your download folder, move it to a folder where you would like to work with the files, unwrap the zipped file, and just open the Blender file by double-clicking it. Alright, now that all of those of you who skipped ahead have rejoined us, a quick overview of everything again. Use the middle mouse button to rotate, shift middle to move it across the screen, and then control middle to zoom, or just use the scroll wheel. To quickly save any changes you make to the image as you draw, just click here in the image editor window, which is this window on your right hand side, and hit Alt S. This is because Blender saves the images separately from the project, so whenever you save the project, which is Control S, it will save everything except the images. So as you draw, it won't save anything if you hit Control S. You have to make sure to hit Alt S or click Image, Save. Now, if you want to pick the color to draw with, just look here at the image editor and just adjust the color to whatever you want to draw with. So say you want to start out by drawing all your land masses a sort of dark saturated brown, you can do it like so. Now it will draw with this brown color. Now by default I have given it a hard edge so that there's no fall off between the edges, but if you want to change that, you can just scroll over here to fall off and then change it or create whatever you want to. So if I for instance do like this, you're gonna see that it falls off. You may also notice that the size of the brush scales with however far you have zoomed in. So keep that in mind as you work and draw. I have not changed the brush size, I am just zooming in increasingly more. If you ever want to undo several changes and not have to sit through several Control Z's as Blender lags with all these pixels and all these shapes to create a smooth sphere, you can just click Image and reload. And it will load the last image that you saved. You can also adjust the radius up here. So if you don't want such a large circle, you can do this. And if you want to adjust the strength of whatever color you're painting with, you can adjust it here. So you will see that this circle is more translucent than this one. Of course, most importantly, to draw, you just hold down left click. And it will draw a shape. And as you draw here, it will appear here, though it will be a slightly different shape. Now, of course, if you want to delete, but not use the undo button, you just want to erase some of what you have drawn, look over here in the image editor on the right hand side, click the color you have selected in the color picker, and you're gonna see there will be this color picker, the eyedropper in the color picker. Just use that, select the blue of the background, and you can bring that back here and erase what you've drawn. Or rather, paint over what you have drawn. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the tutorial, the hex is a bit messed up on the poles of the planet, and I would suggest avoid painting on the poles, the North and South Pole, but also avoid drawing across the seam of the planet. So if I, for instance, were to draw across here, find out where that is, right there, and then draw like that, you'll see that over here it will have drawn across the border here and looped back around there, which isn't that much of a problem, but it is a bit annoying if you want to look on the map later and you have half a continent here and the other half of it there. I think we can all agree that it's easier if all of the continents just stay connected as a single shape. So to help with that, here's a little tip. Save the shape, save the image, though we're not going to change the image at the moment. What we're gonna do is open the globe grid image in image editing software of your choice. I'm gonna use Clip Studio Paint, and then if you just create a new layer in whatever program you're using, it's fine if you use Photopea, GIMP, any image editing software, there's plenty to choose from. And what you simply want to do is to create a new layer, select a red color, and then just create a thin red line on the seam of the map. And set the blending mode to multiply, so that you can still see the grid through it. And if you just save that PNG, so if we now reload, look around the backside of the planet, we now have a red line. Now, of course, because the closer to the equator it is, the more stretched out each hexagon is, the same thing happens to the line. So it is very thin at the pole, and it gets thicker towards the equator. Now you can mitigate this by curving the line so that it is thicker near the poles and thinner near the equator, but I don't think that is that much of a problem. Now, of course, if it annoys you that it is slightly off-grid, you can hit Tab to enter edit mode, select everything by hitting A, R to rotate it, Z to make sure it only rotates along the Z axis, and rotate it so that the red line meets the red line. Isn't that nice? And at this point, you can save... No. At this point, you can draw however you want. Personally, I like to hold my pencil as unsteady as I can and create rough shapes for continents. And then zoom in, use the bucket tool to fill the shape. Use the bucket tool to fill the shape and add more detail. And then later, when I want to add more textures and stuff, I do that in another program by using these shapes that have a very hard edge. Now, of course, if you feel like it, you could draw the entire map in another program by just editing the globe map PNG and then open it back up in Blender. That also works. However you want to do it, you're free to go ahead and do it now. You have the artistic license in your hands, and I will leave that to you.